Okay, so now we get to talk about speech perception, which is one of my favorite aspects of this whole class. I think I just said that about music, but music and language really are my favorite things in the world. And if you remember from way back early at the beginning of the semester, my background is in psycholinguistics. I was very interested in how we understand each other, especially when we are ambiguous so often with what we say. I studied reading behavior, but speech is just as interesting to me. It was kind of interesting and straightforward in a way to look at eye movements, and it was harder, especially when I started to look at what's going on when someone's listening to speech and how do we understand each other. But now we have all these really neat, sophisticated techniques for looking at brain activity, and we can examine what's going on in a person's head when they're listening to you speak. I'm going to start this lecture with these questions, and then I have a kind of summary slide at the very end. So it'll be the next lecture, but when we finish up with speech perception, that we'll repeat these questions, and you can just kind of pause and see if you can't answer the questions for yourself a little bit before I guess I will have to do some answering of the questions, unless I get some emails before I create the next slides that someone has anything that they want to help me to say, hey, this is what a student decided, or this is what a student said. So we're going to ask ourselves, what is a speech sound and how do we recognize it? How do we know where words begin and end? That sounds like something that's very straightforward. In English, we can just tell, right? But that's just it. We can just tell. And if you've ever listened to another language, you know this is not as easy as it seems unless you really know the language. And then the final question of how do we handle differences both within speakers and between speakers? I'm going to talk for a little bit about the speech stimulus, so the physical stimulus of speech. It is called the acoustic signal. What I have there to the right is a picture of a person where you can see the insides, you can see the articulators as they are called. The acoustic signal is produced by the position and movement of these structures within the vocal apparatus. And so we are changing the shape of the vocal tract, and the sound that we make depends on the shape of the vocal tract. We are doing this with, as I said, these articulators. They are this is very fine muscle movement that takes quite a while to develop. So we see that babies, infants, very, very young toddlers and so forth, they understand a lot more of what we're saying than they can possibly say back to us, partly because of how long it takes us to develop those very fine motor skills. So, but we're moving as I'm saying all of this, I'm moving my tongue, my lips, my teeth, my jaw, and my soft palate in order to make the sounds that I'm making. And I'm going to distinguish between how we make vowels and how we make consonants. Vowels are created by the overall shape of the vocal tract. As we are making an E, ah, in this case, what's on the speech spectrogram there, ah, the had sound, as we're making that ah sound, there is a resonant frequency that's being created by the shape of the vocal tract. And we see these peaks of pressure at a number of different frequencies. So I'm going to walk you through this speech spectrogram for the word had. A speech spectrogram includes, on the y-axis, you can see that that's frequency. So these are different pitches. And we have a number of different frequencies where we have peaks of pressure, so more intensity, more amplitude at those particular frequencies. And these different frequencies are called formants, where we have those peaks of pressure. So we can see, I'm going to approximate here, but we can see that the first formant, as it is called, it is labeled there F1. We see more amplitude there at about 800 hertz. The second formant, as it is called, is at about 1800 hertz, where again we see slightly more amplitude of that frequency as I'm going had. And then formant 3 is up there about 2300 hertz. Okay, and you can see, so frequency is on the y-axis. We can show the amplitude by those dark bands within the figure, and across the x-axis is time, right? Had is, as I'm saying that, that is occurring across time, and that is the speech spectrogram, and that's how we create vowels. In addition to vowels, we have consonants, and so these are being created by the closure of the vocal tract. In some way, we are constricting the vocal tract as we're pushing that air past our vocal cords for the most part, or potentially not using our vocal cords for a moment. The sound that is created depends on the place of articulation, the manner of articulation, and whether the consonant is voiced or voiceless. So let's walk through these. The place of articulation, if I use the examples of b, p, b, p, so b is bilabial, and p, they are bilabial. I'm putting my two lips bilabial, two lips together to create that sound. If we look at v, f, v, f, f as in fish, since sometimes we lose some of those higher frequency sounds, and S as in F's kind of start to sound alike, but f as in fish, those are labiodental. If you want to start, I'm going to encourage you a couple of times here to start doing this with your mouth and playing with the sounds in your mouth. So labiodental, we are putting our lips to our teeth, or really our teeth to our lips here to make the v, f sound. Okay, so that's the place of articulation. Some examples. I'm going to walk through a few more of those with the picture. Manner of articulation. So if we go back to our b, p, b, p, these are called stops, as we are really stopping the air from being released for a moment, a complete stop. Whereas v, f, v, f, those are known as fricatives, as you might think of it as there's some friction there as the sound is passing through and out of the mouth. There's also voiced, voiceless, which I've tried to stay in the right order here. So b, p, b being the voiced, p being the voiceless. If you want to choose a couple words like bat and pat, you're going to put your hands on your throat and feel your vocal cords when you say bat. So go ahead and do this. Bat, bat. There at the b, you can feel your vocal cords vibrating. Do this again, but feel the vocal cords again, but with pat, pat, pat. You feel the vocal cords vibrating when the vowel starts, not when you're doing the p. And the same goes with vat, vat. If you say vat, you can feel your vocal cords vibrating at the v. If you say fat, 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 your vocal cords do not start vibrating until you get to the vowel sound. And so here's an example. If you want to see if you notice that there are forward slashes around the D, this denotes that we're talking about a phoneme here, which we're about to talk about. So this d sound is a voiced alveolar stop. It's voiced like the b. It's alveolar in that you're putting your tongue up against this, what's called the alveolar ridge back there behind your teeth. D, feel where that is, d, d, and it is a stop. Again, you're stopping the air. So you place your tongue against the alveolar ridge and then release a slight rush of air as you move your tongue away to create the d, d sound. I just showed the d as an example of a phoneme and how those forward slashes are denoting that this is a phoneme. A phoneme is referring to the smallest segment of speech that if we changed it, we would change the meaning of the word. This is sometimes referred to as being linguistically contrastive. Okay, we're changing the meaning of the word when we change a phoneme. So if we look at the word bit, bit, it is made up of three phonemes, b, I, and t. If we change the b to p, it becomes pit. We've changed the meaning of the word. If we change the I to a, it becomes bat. We've changed the meaning of the word. If we change the t to d, it becomes bid, and we've changed the meaning of the word. Okay, so here comes the fun part. This does not look great, and what I usually do in class is I hand out this, and on the other side is a picture of the face with the articulatory motors or the articulatory mechanisms, so you can see why these different places are called what they're called and so forth. But I'm going to walk us through the manners of articulations a little bit. We'll go through the places of articulations. If you look at along the horizontal axis there at the top when we're talking about our consonants, I'm going to see different places of articulation. So we're going to quickly go through the stops, voiceless and then voiced in each of these cases. And I'm going to try to make it so that you can see what's on this slide as much as possible. And so usually what I do is I print these out and you get together with a partner in the classroom. And since we don't have a classroom here, I'm going to ask you to do this with somebody that you are living with or staying with at the moment. And I know that this might seem a little strange, but it can be fun. So let's just do this. Let's play games with phonemes, and go play some games with phonemes with a friend of yours where you are one person is going through and creating them and the other person is listening. I actually suggest usually to my class that the person who's listening just sometimes think about closing off your ears and watching the other person and see how much you can get, how much information about the speech that you are receiving just via lip reading. Okay, these are out of context. They're very difficult to understand, but it might give you some appreciation of what deaf people must be doing when they are reading lips. And we can get some information that way, but it creates a lot more ambiguity. So again, get with a partner, feel these things in your mouth, because we're going to start talking about phonemes versus allophones, and it's important to see that they are different. And to some extent, this is about how things feel and are being actually created in your mouth. Okay, so I'm going to go through the stops first. Bilabial, I'm putting my two lips together for P as in pat, and B, the voiced as in bat. We did the alveolar ridge there with the D before, so you're putting your tongue up against your alveolar ridge. Again, kind of feel where that is back behind your teeth. When you do the voiceless T as in tack, or D as in dig. And then the velar back there towards the very back, kind of top of your mouth behind the soft palate, the velum. You have K as in cat, and the voiced G as in get. We have fricatives, so it's caused by this kind of friction. It's not quite a complete stop. The labiodental, I'm putting my teeth to my lips for F as in fat, and V as in vet or vat. I can't really read that. The dental, so I'm putting usually my tongue between my teeth. I'm using my two teeth though to create the, then, the as in then, which is the voiced. I actually would put a voiceless on there as th as in thin, okay, or thick. Alveolar, I'm not quite putting my tongue up to that alveolar ridge, but it's going up towards that alveolar ridge when I'm using S as in sat, or Z as in zap. Some people might actually call those dental because you are putting your two teeth together. And then the palatal, where your tongue goes up towards the soft palate. Again, these are fricatives, so we have the voiceless sh as in ish, and j as in azure. It's what the author gives you here. And then the glottal fricatives, one of my favorite fricatives, one of my favorite areas, the glottal, back there at the very back, behind the velum at the glottis. If you feel back where you're making that kind of sound in had, that's a glottal fricative. We actually have a glottal stop when we say something like uh-oh, uh-oh. Like between the and the o, there's this glottal stop, but it's not a phonemic difference in our language. It's not linguistically contrastive. Okay, we have affricatives, which I usually think of as something between a fricative and a stop. So ch as in church, and j, the voiced as in judge. Nasals, where the sound is really coming out through the nasal cavity. So the bilabial, where I put my lips together from mat. The alveolar, we put our tongue to our alveolar ridge for n, nat. And then the velar, we're back at the velum again when we make that ng sound, as in sing. I'm not going to go as much into the liquids, the glides, but we have l, late, r, rate for liquids, and w, when, and y, yet for glides. We also have our vowels, and so how we're really creating the sound with the overall, just an overall shape of the vocal tract. And I'm going to go through just what's happening with the resonance and with where the tongue is. So if we say something like E, beat, beat, the resonance is up towards the front of the mouth, and the tongue is up high. Beat, beat, kind of feel where your tongue is. I'm going to move down to the low back. So at the low back there at the bottom right is all, if I could make it out of context, all, as in palm, palm. And you can feel the tongue comes down and low in your mouth, and the resonance is kind of back in the back of your mouth. It's hard to feel where the resonance is, but that's where it is. So if we walk through those, what are in the front of the mouth, we're going to go from high to middle here. E as in beat, I as in bit, A as in baby, E as in bet, and A as in bat. Make our tongue more in the center for things like as in bird, the schwa sound, as in sofa, sofa. And then underneath that is, I'm pretty sure it's as in nut, nut. And then towards the back, as we have our tongue still high, as in boot, boot, and book. O, and coming down to the middle, and then low as in bode, O as in bode, ah as in bought, bought, ah, and then palm, palm. Okay, again, I'm going to recommend that you get together with a friend or family member and play games with phonemes, feel them in your mouth, try to say some of these words or other words that use them, and have the other person who's listening sometimes not listen and just look at the face and see how much information you can get just from looking at the face. These next couple of slides come from my teaching assistant from linguistics. She was my teaching assistant for over 2 semesters, about 2.5 semesters, where she came in and helped me out when I needed her the most. And then the last 2 semesters she worked for me. She gave the speech perception lecture, and she is in linguistics, and she was at least as interested in speech production as speech perception. And I think they go together so well. And it's part of the reason I keep saying just feel this in your mouth, because the articulation really is something different than the perception to some extent. Although the articulation is causing our perception, there are things that we don't hear that are part of what people are articulating because they do not make a meaningful difference in our language. A lot of them we stop hearing. So she starts out by talking about the place of articulation, the primary place in the oral cavity that is involved with the production of the speech sound. And here I have a link, this MRI of speech articulation. It is a person who is rapping. I strongly recommend that you go in and click on this. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll have to go back into the lectures and just click on the link. It says links within the PP, I think is how I've labeled that. But it shows this person rapping, and the tongue looks like just this little worm moving around in the mouth really fast. And my teaching assistant, AJ Murphy Dillon, used to say, I don't have that worm thing in my mouth. But yes, we do. That is your tongue. And it moves incredibly quickly, and it looks really funny. So this is another slide. This and the next one are taken from, again, my teaching assistant, AJ Murphy Dillon. She helped me so much with the speech perception lectures, and she added in all of this great information about production and allophones. So phonemes are the representation we have for a particular sound in our mind. As I mentioned before, they are linguistically contrastive. What this means is when I change a phoneme, I change the meaning of the word. And so phonemes are really about perception, right? Our perception of sounds. Allophones are the articulatory articulatory production of those phonemes, and they are about the productions of those sounds. And so if you can see the picture on this slide, and she has here pattern, the word pattern. In our forward slashes, she has the phonemes that create that word pattern, what we are hearing in the perception of the word pattern, as basically I say it. And then underneath that, in the brackets are showing these are the allophones. These are denoting allophones of those phonemes. And so there's an aspirated P. It's at the beginning of the word, so we have this kind of p pattern as we're saying that. And then if we go to what we've changed there with the T, that's more of a what we would call a flap, maybe, than a T sound. We're not saying pattern. We usually say pattern. And we're not saying the pattern. We're saying this this kind of swallowed sound. So now we will go through various allophones of T. This is actually what AJ was showing on that previous slide. Under pattern, there was the phoneme T, and then underneath that, the brackets. So the brackets are denoting that these are allophones of T, different ways of producing what we perceive as T, as what T sounds like. And if you'll notice my label there, allophones of T, that should appropriately be a lowercase t, but I'm not figuring out how to change my font to fix that in this particular design of PowerPoint. So if we go look at the allophones of T, what's denoted underneath there, we have T as in pats and bet. We have that kind of aspirated T, so the T with the small h above it shows the same as we saw with the P in pattern. When we start a word with T, or the sound T, it has this little bit of an aspiration after it. And if you put your hand in front of your mouth when you say something like bet, and feel the difference between when you say that and when you go Tuesday, or tired, you'll feel that aspiration. You'll feel that little bit of breath of air that comes out with the Tuesday and tired. We have an almost ch sound for retrieve and feature. It's pretty clear for me. It sounds like ch when I say feature, even though again, when we perceive that, we're still really hearing t, that it's a t there. We have what's called a flap when we it's created with our tongue just flapping up against that alveolar ridge for butter and pattern. Butter. Had to feel that for a second. And then we really have something that's very close to what is a glottal stop for most of us, for kitten and button. Okay, you might, depending on your dialect, you might have more of a flap and say kitten or button that's more flapped in there that I can't even really do. Okay. She has some questions down here. I usually have my questions in another color, and she did the same thing here. And so you might want to think about some of these. I'm going to go through and answer a little bit of some of them, but think about your answers. Maybe pause things here and think about feeling these. Again, feel these in your mouth. So what articulatory features are shared between these different allophones when you're going to, ch, butter, kitten, the ones I can't do out of context very well. What's similar about them? What's different about them? You might try pronouncing some of the above words with different allophones and see how that feels or how that sounds. So if I tried to say something like butter with the ch sound, it would be butcher. That does not feel or sound right. Sometimes I have somebody in my class who's has some people who are from England in their family, and you'll notice that they do the glottal stop for something like a butter, which again I can't do because I am American and not from England. But you might try some of the different sounds, putting them into the different contexts, and seeing how they feel and how they sound in that context, because they'll sound wrong, and then they'll sound like a different sound. They will no longer sound like t in any way, shape, or form. And then in what environments are different allophones present? So I've already mentioned the Tuesday and tired being at the beginning of the word, but you can see where we use the ch, where we use the flap, and where we use the glottal stop. One of the things that makes it incredible that we understand speech when we're listening to somebody else is what's the lack of invariance. There's a great deal of variability in speech, and I'm going to go through a number of reasons and things that cause this variability or this lack of invariance. We're going to start by talking about the context in which we are hearing these sounds, which is very much influenced by co-articulation, that we are articulating more than one sound at a time. The sounds that come before and after a particular sound that I'm making, that context is influencing how I articulate a particular sound. We really just saw this with those allophones. But here we have some idealized speech spectrograms of di, and do, maybe duh. I think it's duh. Where if you remember in the speech spectrogram, time is going across the x-axis, we have frequency on the y-axis, and then we had inside that you could see the, if you go back to that speech spectrogram of had, there were bands where there was stronger intensity or higher amplitude, but there was also other sounds in there. He's taken out all the other measures in that speech spectrogram and just left the really high intensity formants, as they're called. And we see that the formants are the I and the sounds, the vowel sounds. And in this case, the formant transitions are from the consonants. And I have done a little tiny bit of pulling apart speech spectrograms and comparing speech spectrograms of different people saying different specific sentences, and I have a really hard time telling where exactly one word ends and the next word begins. Even as I'm listening to the speech and looking at the spectrogram, these formant transitions are somewhat unclear. They're very influenced by the vowels that come after them and the sounds that come before them, and they all kind of get mushed together when you say something like sk, st, all those different consonant sounds. But this is just d as in d, and d as in duh. Okay. If we look at d, those formant transitions, we have in the first one, we have this really low frequency and then coming up slightly, so maybe close to 0 hertz, probably a little bit higher than that, and then up to maybe 100, 200 hertz. And then we have a higher one that's going from about 2200 hertz to about 2600 hertz. And that's, in that case, what we're hearing in d is a D sound. Okay, let's look at the one for duh. That first formant is doing, or the first formant transition in this case is doing the same thing. It's going up from a very low frequency and coming up to about probably maybe a couple hundred hertz at the highest. The top formant transition is now starting up at about 1100 hertz and coming down to about 700 hertz. So in a completely different frequency range, going in a different direction, and that is because instead of an I coming after it, an comes after it. And yet, d, duh still sounds like a d to us. Okay, so stay tuned. We will finish with speech perception on Friday, October 16th. And I'll miss seeing you, as I always do. And I hope everyone is staying safe and staying healthy. And I'll look forward to seeing you again as much as I see you on Monday.